this is chapter 9, part 3. And as you can see on this slide, this was the last slide of part 2. So here in the lymphatic system, you can see something I just mentioned, the antibody. So this is an antibody, the blue with the yellow tips, and the blue part is the main structure that doesn't really affect anything, and the yellow tips in this image are what have the specific shape to what it's touching here on this cell. You can't really tell if this cell is you or a foreigner. So self from non-self. Think about it. How does your immune system know not to attack you, but to attack the bad guy, the pathogen? And that all becomes from a learned response based on shapes. Remember, proteins don't function correctly unless they're the correct shape. And your immune system is the poster child of that phrase, which is why I harp on it over and over again. Everything in your cells, in your body as a whole, the only way they have to communicate are molecular shapes. So this is an antibody, and it is for some reason tagging an antigen that's hard to make out on the surface of the cell. And this picture is very nondescript, meaning you can't tell if it's tagging a bad guy or this person has an autoimmune disorder and it's tagging part of them. So what do you know about allergies? If you want to at any point, pause the video and try to think ahead and then play it. So just so you know, I'm gonna keep going and keep talking about it. So allergies themselves, most allergies are proteins. Now some can be a venom like a bee sting or something like that. But most when you think of allergies, of foodborne allergies, most of them come from protein sources like fish, shellfish, peanuts. So what will happen is it's a foreign protein entering your body. And the immune system, now this is in a very, very short nutshell, very small nutshell. We're not going into a lot of detail here. Your immune system senses that foreign protein, which good, it does, and it wants to handle it if there's something that needs immediate attention. The problem is with a food allergy, it overreacts. And when it overreacts, there's a lot of similarities to other diseases too with this. It'll make your capillary beds permeable and cause white blood cells to leak out and go to the area. The problem is it is systemic. It's all over the body. And in doing so, it can cause anaphylaxis, which is obviously if your blood starts leaving your vascular system, you're going to lose blood pressure. And you lose blood pressure so fast that you can't get blood to the cells. You can't perfuse your tissues. And if that happens, you die of shock. That's what an EpiPen does. An EpiPen constricts all the blood vessels systemically, keeps the blood pressure at a healthy level until you can seek real medical attention. But allergies are a foreign protein for the most part. They're caused by that. And then the immune system overreacts, causes the vascular system to become permeable. You might have heard of a cytokine storm with all the COVID discussions and everything. And it's very similar in that respect. Fluids leak out of the vascular system in a disproportionate amount, causing havoc in other areas of the body. Here is an autoimmune disorder, which we mentioned. This is lupus, and this has the telltale sign of the butterfly rash over the face. Lupus is really not known that well, and I'm going to show you slides in a little bit that they're finding a lot more in research, and it's going to go back to the microbiome. I know, shocker, right? That because lupus, there's a whole mess of autoimmune diseases under lupus, and they can even oscillate. I knew somebody who had lupus that attacked certain parts of her skin and then would attack other parts of her skin, attacked her thyroid. She was only 18. They say it's brought on by trauma. But then you have to think, well, what does trauma bring on? Stress. What does stress bring on? Lowered immune system, bad eating habits sometimes, or no eating habits. It's very hard to pinpoint some of the causes of these. There's a lot more unknown than known about autoimmune disorders. And here are a few of them. Rheumatoid arthritis is different than regular arthritis. Rheumatoid is when your B cells, your antibodies, and your T cells attack your cartilage at the ends of your bones. And then bones touch bone. That's very painful, and they can actually fuse together. Multiple sclerosis is when it attacks your myelin sheath, your insulation of your nervous system, And as you know, with the action potential within the nerve stimulus, it can't go in and out. You would not signal a nerve. It would short circuit without that myelin sheath on the axon. And type 1 diabetes, there's a lot of the type 1 diagnoses that has to do with an autoimmune disorder. So the person's immune system is attacking their pancreas. And then you have a variety of bowel syndromes, from Crohn's to celiac to diverticulitis, that can cause issues. And that's serious. You might think, oh, it's just the bowel. But the bowel is your source of nutrients. And without nutrients, you can't stay healthy. So it's basically having your mouth wired shut. You can't absorb your nutrition. So autoimmune disorders, here's an x-ray of rheumatoid arthritis. If this was an autoimmune disorder in this picture in the left, that antibody would be tagging the person's cells, not a pathogen. So it's you attacking you instead of attacking the bad guy. So here is it's a poster of a scientific research done at Yale. It's by Dr. Kragel's group. So usually the PI they're involved, but they have a whole bunch of grad students working in this realm. And this is at Yale University at their School of Medicine. And there's a lot here, but you can work through it, I think. This is the inside of your intestinal tract. This is the intestinal tract wall. They just put gut wall. This is the liver. And then you have antibodies, and then they're showing 2 different kinds of autoimmune disorders. So what they're saying with leaky gut, in this case, the bacteria can get out of the gut. Now, don't misunderstand. Your gut leaks a little bit. It's permeable because you're absorbing your nutrients into your bloodstream. It shouldn't be overly permeable. If it's overly permeable, the pathogenic bacteria, if you have some in your intestinal tract, and most everybody does with E. coli, you need it, will get out where it shouldn't be, into the blood system, also into the peritoneal cavity. If it's just in the blood system, your immune system can attack it, and you would have a serious response to that. But if it gets into the peritoneal cavity, that can really cause some havoc. And what it can do then, the pathogenic bacteria can get through the gut wall, the intestinal wall, and then set up shop on the liver, on the kidneys, on different organs inside your peritoneal cavity. You remember that from the beginning of chapter 9. Once the immune system senses these foreigners, these foreign pathogenic bacteria or microbes, they will start attacking them. But as they attack them, they're going to also attack you, because the bacteria are right there on your cells. And there'll be a lot of collateral damage. And in this image specifically, they're talking about lupus nephritis. And one of the reasons why they put lupus up here is because they really don't know the etiology. They don't understand why is all of a sudden your immune system attacking your nephron, your kidney. That's just bizarre. And what they've found in the last 10 to 15 years, there's a lot of these novel autoimmune disorders that they're finding that it's because of this leaky gut. And we're going to get into, I think you're already guessing, how the gut becomes permeable, and we actually invite these problems on ourselves by our poor diets. These links will take you to the actual paper on it and some other information if you're interested. Prevotella bacteria is the one that is very much associated with rheumatoid arthritis. So it's actually, they're finding, are some cases of rheumatoid arthritis caused by this bacteria and leaky gut, as opposed to what we used to think was genetic. And they're really finding that with celiac. So if you have a gluten allergy or something like that, it's interesting to look into what can I do to heal my gut, eat whole foods, and see if then it diminishes. Here is an easier diagram to look at. You can see along the top, you can see the different causes of leaky gut. It's not just bad food. It can be toxins, stress, drugs, and I'm not talking illicit, I'm talking antibiotics to painkillers, pathogens you get through the food supply, or it could be an organ malfunction for some reason. These wear away the mucous membrane. They can change the actual gut microbiome, and then more pathogens and more molecules that shouldn't be in the peritoneal cavity get out, and then these are a summary of the issues that are caused, and they can get very serious. I mean, people have died from this, and they're really starting to take they've been for the last 10 years taking leaky gut seriously. It used to be kind of poo-pooed and not looked on as a serious condition with Western medicine, but it's now changing. So what are some solutions? Well, here are some. They've been putting this out in writing for quite a while now. These are the similarities between people with serious cases of leaky gut. And I'm not saying this is, correlation is not causation, but these are very strongly correlated. So you can see getting, if a baby is not breastfed and gets formula. Another thing you want to be careful with formula is look at the label and learn how to read labels, because so many baby formulas are full of high fructose corn syrup or corn syrup. I don't understand it. I'm still trying to, but you want to make sure you're given formula that's not full of those kinds of sugars. They're finding 5-year-olds with fatty liver now. Gestational age, was the baby born premature? Was the mother under stress during pregnancy? Environmental, obviously, that's a wide open right there. Antibiotic use, the amount of antibiotics given to kids just from ear infections to anything when they're young and their microbiome is developing is having a serious toll on it, as well as adults. Frequent hospitalization as a child, obviously genetics that can have a cause, and then whether it was cesarean or vaginal birth, they are finding a lot of correlations with those and serious issues with the microbiome and leaky gut. So how do you increase healthy gut flora, microbes, or maintain it? FODMAP diet, you can look into that. It's very specific, but it helps increase the fiber in your foods for the day, and that's definitely going to feed the healthy microbiome and kill off the pathogenic. But vice versa, if a lot of sugar and ultra processed foods are eaten, you're starving the good bacteria, wiping out the mucous membrane, and increasing leaky gut at a very high level. Here is some research done by Dr. Meyer at Penn State, I believe. And what they did was they took mice that were sterilized in their gut. They gave them typical human gut microbiota that would be in the large intestine. Then in the one case, they deprived them of any fiber and then infected them with enteric pathogen, and they wanted to see what would happen. If the mice in the control group got fiber-rich diet, their mucous membrane stayed, no leaky gut. The fiber-free diet, the membrane became very leaky and pathogenic bacteria were found. So what should you eat? Well, these are the things that, I mean, you'll hear people say, oh, you shouldn't eat meat. Ansel Keys put a real hurting on us in our dietary guidelines, and they're establishing dietary guidelines over the next 2 years, new ones hopefully, and hopefully they'll start coming out that muscle meats are not bad for you. Saturated fat is not bad for you as long as you don't sit down to a bucket of it. Eggs are not bad for you. I mean, an egg becomes a chicken, I mean, if you're not eating 12 a day. And definitely plant foods to get the fiber. There's a lot of different molecules and nutrients in plants that you need. And the problem is if they're ultra processed, then the good stuff is taken out, like with flour. All the endosperm and the germ layer is taken out, and you're getting the starch. And that is what's tearing up the microbiome. And denial, I have a question mark, because I was in denial for years. I'm a hypocrite with this. If you don't read labels, you don't know what's going in your body. And worse if you have kids. They're finding so many correlations. I don't have the time to go into it right now. One of the best things you can do is find out all the different names for something that is sugar and or will break down to sugar within a few minutes. Because that's the other trick. Oh, it says starch, it doesn't say sugar. But if it's highly processed starch, it will break down to sugar in no time and have the same insulin response. And that's one of the other issues. Fasting, look this up. This was a 2016 Nobel Prize going to Osumi. Autophagy, we talked about this with lysosomes, the organelle in the cells that go around and scavenge broken down organelles or pathogens. And if you go without food for 24 to 48 hours, your body will start self-cleaning. So you hear about these colon cleanses and enemas, and it just sounds, how about we just let our cells clean up their own mess? And the only way to do that is to stop giving them things. If you start giving them food, They have to turn inward and they have to clean up their room, so to speak, and they'll become much more efficient. Now, I say that with caution because if anybody's on medication, you should always ask a doctor. Metformin is one drug that will almost make the liver incapable of gluconeogenesis. That's how it helps with stabilizing blood glucose. But if you aren't on any medication, you should really go to YouTube and see some accounts of how young people turn their lives around just by practicing this. Because once they did the food and they got their energy back and they got their health back, maybe their skin, maybe lowered some body fat and just felt better overall, then they found out that it was also helping their mind. It was making them sharper, more focused. They didn't feel as lost. I'm not making this up. There's a whole group of 20 to 30-year-olds on YouTube doing dopamine detoxes. And you get dopamine for junk food, you get dopamine for video games, you get dopamine for gossiping. It's the quick addiction neurotransmitter. And fasting, depending on why you're doing it, and if you prepare yourself mentally, it's not that bad. I do it regularly for 48 hours every other week. I couldn't believe the anti-inflammation response and how much it sharpens your mind. So these are some pretty funny inventions. Smart toilet and mirror. I don't know if they're mass produced at this point, but you can click on those links and it's supposed to analyze your fecal matter to tell you if you're on the ball with feeding your microbiome. I think at this point, I'm just going to throw it out there. I think that's a little bit over the top, but okay. And the smart mirror is you look in and it has all these kind of vital sign ability to read. It'll read your retina. It can look in the eye. It can, by shining a light in there, it can sense oxygen levels with UV light. It's just amazing. Click on that link and do some reading. I don't think they're mass produced yet, but it would be an interesting thing to have. Probiotics and prebiotics we mentioned earlier. I should have the pre before the pro because the prebiotics are the fiber, and then the probiotics are the drinks with the bacteria. Now again, you want to be careful. If you're buying a probiotic drink with bacteria in it for your microbiome and it's full of sugar, that's kind of pointless. And the other thing is if you drink a probiotic or eat something that has cultures in it and you don't have fiber in your diet, you're just going to go to the bathroom and waste your money. It's just going to go right out. It has to have food in there, and if you're not eating fiber, it's just a waste of money to even consume them. And obviously circulation. If you can get cortisol out of your blood supply, then you have less fight or flight, you have less lipogenesis going on, and possibly coronary artery disease. So just moving. I didn't even call this exercise for a reason. Okay, not exercise, just moving. It can be a hobby that just gets you moving. Do it with friends. You'll be more likely to do it. But the circulation is what's getting the metabolic byproducts out that we've talked about earlier, and establishing fresh blood supply with nutrients and oxygen. And that just leads to health. And also, remember we talked about coronary artery disease in 20 to 30-year-olds. If there was ever a time to really make sure that at least 50% of your diet is good plant fiber, even just doing that, cutting out sugary drinks and making sure 50% of your diet is plant fiber, even hot aired popcorn, not that prepared stuff. Hot aired popcorn is so full of polyphenols and fiber and resistant starch. Yes, it has starch, but not the kind that digests quickly. It goes all the way to your large intestine. You spray it with a little bit of avocado oil that you buy, you've got your omega-3s, you've got fiber, you've got polyphenols, and you got resistant starch. And it's cheap. It's so cheap. And a hot air popper is like $15. I'll throw out ideas every now and then, but I just can't believe some of the reports I'm reading about coronary artery disease. Go on YouTube and look at some of the accounts of these 20 and 30-year-old, what I call youngins, with coronary artery disease. 99% blockage of the coronary arteries. At that age, it's unheard of. And they're directly linking it, like I showed you in a slide before, to all this metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, poor diet, no exercise. Take control. Don't, what is that? An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So now we're into looking at the different pathogens, because the lymph system is fighting pathogens, bringing on death of disease. This is a very gorgeous picture, 16,000 times magnified, of Staphylococcus aureus. More specific, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And all I'm going to do is just mention how they're named. So Staphylo means grape-like. As you can see, they're in a grape-like cluster. Coccus means round. So each bacteria is round, and aureus means gold. It's just so when you see these really convoluted scientific names, they really do have a reason. So nothing you really have to memorize. It's just most viruses are named for what they infect and a disease they cause, and most bacteria, not all, but most, are named for their shape, how they live, their arrangement, and their color when they're viewed in a microscope. This is MRSA in a wound. You probably have MRSA on you, but if it's outside your skin and it's in your hair, it's no big deal. If it gets in your blood supply, that's a big deal. This is what it can look like if it gets in the peritoneal cavity. So remember what I talked about. Below the diaphragm, this line is the peritoneal cavity. And notice it's all inflamed. That's because this man has MRSA in the cavity, munching away on his organs. And when it eats, it gives off gas, and that's what bloats him. It's called ascites. And remember, anything above the diaphragm, this is a thoracic cavity up here. And so they would aspirate that and then flush the peritoneal cavity with antibiotics. This is a CAT scan image of this. So you can see the fluid. This is the liver here, looking down on the person. Liver's in the front, spine, spinal erectors, rib cage around the front, and this is the fluid. And then you wouldn't really see the air, but you can see the fluid on there from this, what ascites will cause. So to get some perspective, now I know we've been through chapter 8 with the different taxonomy with the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes, and we talked about viruses not being alive. So this is giving you some perspective, and I think I did this once before, but if in the room you're sitting in, if that room, the size it is, was a eukaryotic cell, then a bacteria would be a pencil or pen on your desk. And a virus would be maybe the eraser, or something possibly even smaller than that. Depends on the virus. And then, as you know, viruses aren't classified as living because they only have one nucleic acid, not both, and they don't have a cell. They just have a protein coat. And then you can see most prokaryote cells, bacteria, can swim. They can move. They're motile is what it's called. And we've been through all the organelles in the cell itself, but just giving you some kind of understanding. So antigens and antibodies. So every one of these, even a virus, even though it's not a cell, has an antigen on its surface. That's how your immune system knows that it's foreign. Same with a bacteria. And then again, same with you. Now, an autoimmune disorder would be if your antibodies were attacking your cells. So the antibodies would tag the cell, and then a macrophage would come in and eat it. So here are some viral structures. This is a scanning electron microscope image of an adenovirus. This is adenovirus in the middle. And on the bottom is the flu virus. So double-stranded DNAs, herpes and HIV, are very mutatable because of their double-stranded DNA. There's like 109 different strains of herpes. You think of herpes simplex 2 because it's sexually transmitted. But mumps, chickenpox, shingles, that's all herpes. Herpes isn't just a sexually transmitted disease, and that's because it's double-stranded. Now, the flu is an RNA virus, and you can see adenovirus, which they use a lot in gene therapy that we talked about in chapter 7, is a DNA virus. Because if you're going to put DNA into a human cell that has DNA, you're going to want a DNA virus. So the flu is not used. And that is a really good link for understanding the flu. It's done by NPR. It's really helpful. So yeah, the flu and bacteria all reproduce super fast. That's why they can mutate even faster than vaccines can be kept up with. Like, for instance, H1N1 of the flu, if it mutated to be H1N5, if you got the H1N1 vaccine, you would not be protected against H1N5. So, and they can do that within a flu season. So it's not necessarily that the flu vaccine might not work for you. It's just that they mutate so fast. And interferon, all you can do is interfere with a viral reproductive mechanism. Remember, they're not alive. You can't kill them like an antibiotic. Antibiotics are for bacteria. And here is COVID. So as you can see right away, what nucleic acid does it have? Well, RNA, right? Single-stranded RNA. It's an RNA virus. And here's the host cell, and you can see how it's interacting. And another thing to make sure you understand, it's like HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19, because there's a whole array of these different viruses and then a whole array of the different diseases that they cause. So that's just bringing in the fact that it's an RNA virus. Luckily, it's not a DNA double-stranded virus. Here is an example of someone being an asymptomatic carrier. So what does that mean? Well, Typhoid Mary had typhoid, and a bacteria, and she could carry an infectious dose of this bacteria but not be harmed. It's kind of like some people can have the COVID, they can have the SARS virus, they can have SARS-CoV-2 and test positive for it, but then not be sick with it. They're just an asymptomatic carrier. So she would, this was early 1900s, she would prepare food, and because they didn't wear gloves or wash hands much at that time, she would infect people through, you can see these little skulls that she's cracking, she would infect people through her preparing food. And it killed them, because we didn't have antibiotics at that time. Penicillin wasn't even around when this all happened. So Salmonella typhi, I showed you a picture of Salmonella typhi undergoing binary fission in chapter 8. So yeah, it's contaminated water, but for some reason she could carry around an infectious dose, and just by touching food and then someone eating it, they would be infected. So here's your lymphatic system. We're only going to talk about 4 main structures. We're going to talk about the thymus, the lymph nodes, the bone marrow, and the spleen. And you don't know a lot about the lymph. It just runs all along where your vascular system runs, and it swaps fluid up to 3 liters a day. It's cleaning and returning that fluid into your blood supply. So if you've ever heard of lymphedema, it's when the lymph system duct is shut down in some area and you start to swell. It's really scary. Look up lymphedema on Google and you'll see what I'm talking about. But there's a video here. You can go and play it. They're one-way valves, just like the veins. So as the capillary bed, you're going to hear a lot about that in chapter 9, because that's where everything happens to keep a human healthy. In the capillary bed, as the blood fluids, proteins, molecules seep out, the extra fluid is absorbed into the one-way valved lymph system, and then all of it moves back up through the lymph nodes where it's cleaned and then dumped into the heart. Now remember, we're going to talk about this when we get to lipids too, so I won't bring that up right now. And lymph nodes themselves are the training grounds actually for B cells, monoclonal selection to make antibodies, and the thymus is for T cells. And that would result in lymphedema. Here they are looking at each one of them. So I'm going to go through these from the bone marrow. Bone marrow makes all blood cells, red and white, erythrocytes and leukocytes. All blood cells are made in the bone marrow. And actually, that's not most where the bone marrow is. It's mostly in thin bones like your skull and your ribs and your pelvis. The thymus trains T cells. So the T cells are made in the bone marrow, but they go to the thymus to learn what antigens to find, depending on exposure to a pathogen, exposure to a vaccine, etc. The lymph nodes are where B cells are trained. And B cells get monoclonal selected, and then they make antibodies. B cells make antibodies. And then the spleen is where red blood cells are recycled. Now this is a very helpful video, and when you get done with that video, you should be really easy to go through these questions, but I answered some of them in just what I covered. So here you go. If this is an antibody, these yellow Y's, remember we looked at those earlier, this would be a B cell. B cells make antibodies, and hopefully this is not you, this is a pathogen. It's tagging the antigen. So B cells are made in the bone marrow, then trained in the lymph node, and then they make antibodies accordingly, and then the antibodies actually go and tag the antigen, and then a macrophage would eat this, and then that would result in pus. Here I'm flipping back to that image I showed you earlier with leaky gut. So now you're going to start to see if the pathogen gets out of the gut where it shouldn't into the peritoneal cavity and lands on an organ that's very important, the liver, the kidney, then your antibodies are like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And they're going to come and tag that bacteria just like they are down here. But the problem is there's going to be collateral damage. And because they go into the organ itself, they don't sit on the outside. And there's going to be a massive immune response and massive systemic inflammation. So trying to link these two things together for you. And now we're into the digestive system. So starting this out, you might have some familiarity with gastroesophageal reflux disease. That's just when stomach acid gets out of the stomach where it should be and into the esophagus where there's not protection. There's not enough mucus there and it burns, and it can burn badly. So you can see the different pictures here with the actual sphincter being bad. Some people can have actually a bad valve there that can be replaced, or sometimes it just gets exacerbated or made worse by what you eat, or the fact that, exercise. It's a whole bunch of things. It can be genetic, but usually it's a valve problem or a food intake problem. And if you kept taking antacids to curb the pH, the acid getting up into your esophagus, well, then think about what's going to happen. If your stomach acid goes from 1 to 4, well, first of all, you're not going to be able to digest proteins because the pepsin enzyme in the stomach needs it to be 1. Remember, enzymes need an optimal pH, and 4 is not it. So you would not, even if you ate a lot of protein, you wouldn't get the amino acids for protein synthesis. Another problem is the stomach acid is your first line of defense against foodborne illness. So if you buffer that to 4 by constantly taking Rolaids or Tums or Tagamet, well, then you're wiping out your first line of defense. And if you eat something with a pathogen in it, it could get into your bloodstream. This is a hiatal hernia. This is when a piece of the stomach can actually get up through the diaphragm. There's holes in the diaphragm. I hope you watch that video back in the musculoskeletal section. And there's holes in your diaphragm, and where all the inferior, superior vena cava can go through, the esophagus can go through. Well, it can get herniated and bush out, and then it can't go back down. And now, if this is stomach cell right here, then that's making acid, and it feels like it's in your thoracic cavity. That's why they call it heartburn, because it feels like your heart's burning. So for a mental schema exercise, picture through, I'm going to go to the next slide and actually do this. If you just ate some toast, now what you want to think about too is, what is toast? I don't eat it because it's refined carbohydrate, I know, but I'm old and I have to be very careful. So toast is, depending on what kind you're eating, if it doesn't have whole grains actually in it, like flaxseed and the whole grain, then it's refined carbohydrate, and it's going to break down from starch to glucose. So we're talking about carbohydrates here. Might have a little bit of protein in, but it's usually insignificant. So you eat the toast, you masticate it in the mouth. Chewing is very important. You should actually chew your food quite a few times before you swallow. If you're eating foods that don't need to be chewed, that might be another thing you have to think about. Peristalsis will move it down through the esophagus. The esophagus doesn't really do much, just pushes it down in a wave-like fashion, and then it will land in the stomach, and there's stomach acids in here, hydrochloric acid of 1, and there's pepsin to digest mainly protein in the stomach. And then this will be sterilized by the acid, cleaned up a little bit. There are some other enzymes, but I'll ask you to know them. Then the food will move into the small intestine. It doesn't look small, it looks long, but it's small in diameter. And the small intestine is the area of reabsorption. So intestines do not digest, they reabsorb. And they reabsorb nutrients, especially the small intestine. And how do they do that? How do they get the food from a macromolecule to a monomer or a subunit is because the pancreas back here is going to release digestive enzymes into the small intestine to catabolize the protein to amino acids, lipids into fatty acids, and carbohydrates such as starch and glycogen into glucose. You do have some salivary amylase in the mouth, but the most of the digestion for the macromolecules is done in the small intestine, carbohydrates and fats, and most of the protein is digested in the stomach. It needs that pH. And then we're going to look at the small intestine itself. So the nutrients are absorbed, they go into the bloodstream, then they go back to the liver to be detoxified, to nutrients taken out, and then they go back into the bloodstream itself. You go to the vena cava, right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein, left atria, left ventricle, aorta, arteries, and capillaries to all your cells for protein synthesis, for cellular respiration, and to make hormones, to make all these different fats, for phospholipid bilayers, all around all your organelles, and cholesterols and hormones. So, and then if you ate a good fiber diet like you should, that will continue on into this large intestine, and it's called large because it's wide. So small intestine because it's narrow, and large intestine because it's wide, because it goes up, ascending, transverse, and descending. And the microbiome, the majority microbiome is in this large intestine. So if you ate resistant starch and fiber, it'll go make it through the entire intestinal tract and go to the large intestine and feed your microbiome, which makes neurotransmitters, vitamins, short chain fatty acids for healthy hormones, whole bunch of stuff. And then the only one we left out was the liver. The liver is also sending bile through the gallbladder into the small intestine to emulsify lipids. So the liver makes bile out of recycled red blood cells, and then that will be released into the small intestine. It will emulsify lipids, and then lipase from the pancreas can actually really break the lipids down to fatty acids. It's a two-step process because they're non-polar. Remember that from chapter 2. It's a two-step process. Carbohydrates, they just keep broken down more and more. The problem with our diets anymore, they become glucose right away, and our insulin spikes. So they'll become a monosaccharide in the very beginning part of the small intestine, wreaking havoc on our mucosa all the way through it. And the spleen isn't really involved in this. That's recycling red blood cells. And then peristalsis is the movement all the way through. It's continually smooth muscle tissue is contracting in a wave-like fashion, and that's peristalsis. And then ultimately, when you need to go to the bathroom, that's mass peristalsis. The large intestine, not only the microbiome resides here, it's an area of water reabsorption. The only other thing I can add about the pancreas, it's 95% exocrine, which means 95% of the pancreas's job is to make digestive enzymes and release them into the small intestine. Only 5% of the pancreas's job is to make glucagon and insulin, which is endocrine. Endocrine gets released into the blood. Blood, in the blood. Here's a diagram that might help you through that. This would be a good one to print out and kind of flesh out with all the other stuff, information. So you see carbs, lipids, and proteins, and they go down through all the areas. I have some things added in here, pH1 pepsin, protease from the pancreas, and then ultimately amino acids for protein synthesis. And you see the bile from the liver emulsifies the lipids, and then lipase can get a hold of the lipid and break it down into fatty acids to make all sorts of healthy fats in the body. And then carbohydrates start in the amylase in the mouth, then pancreatic amylase. And again, these aren't the only enzymes. I'm just trying to keep it simple. So you only have to know one or two for each of the macromolecules. So these are your macros, each of the macromolecules. I don't include DNA and RNA because they're in everything you eat, because everything you ate was alive. And the large intestine, that's the microbiome, and water reabsorption, peristalsis, and you can see these. And here is a cross section of the small intestine. You can see the little tiny hairs looking all over this. So not only is it folded and convoluted inside, and then it goes around to be 15 feet approximately, it also has these microvilli. Villi and microvilli, they're two different things, but for the sake of this course, these little finger-like projections are full of blood and lymph. And it just massively increases the surface area for absorption of nutrients. So this is how you're going to get your glucose, your fructose, your galactose, your amino acids, your short chain fatty acids, and they'll be absorbed into the blood or lymph and then circulated throughout the body from the liver throughout the whole body to the cells for all the metabolic processes. If someone is on painkillers, I bring this up because I've had a couple of students tell me stories about family members on this. Painkillers, if someone's on this, they stop pain by stopping a nerve stimulus. Okay, so it's very hard to just only limit a nerve stimulus in one area and not another. So a lot of painkillers will actually slow down the enteric nervous system. In other words, you won't have peristalsis at the same rate or at all. And you might think, well, that's no big deal, but it is a big deal. Because if you don't have peristalsis, the material will sit in your large intestine, and what does the large intestine do? Reabsorb water. If you keep reabsorbing water and it's just sitting there and not moving, it's going to wind up fracturing the wall of the large intestine, and then you're going to have all that pathogenic bacteria get into your peritoneal cavity. And you might think, well, I'll go to the hospital. Well, you won't feel it because you're on painkillers. So people die this way. I mean, that would be a horrible way to go. You died of constipation, right? That's basically what this is. So that's why if you're on a serious painkiller, you should also take a laxative or eat something that has a laxative effect, like prunes, sugar-free gum if you chew enough of it. That's a laxative. It's a sugar alcohol. I'm just putting that out there. Some people think, oh, I don't need laxatives, I'm fine. And you can wind up in a real bad situation. I'm going to give 5 minutes on the mouth. So the mouth. You have teeth. We talked about before that you know what an animal eats because of the dentition. If you have molars, you can grind, and if you have incisors, you can cut. So you're an omnivore because you can do both. Just molars, herbivore. Just incisors, carnivore. Okay, just a quick one, takeaway there. But the deal is, if you get a tooth infection, like say you fractured the tooth, something got down in here and infected it, this is all bone. This is solid bone. So if bacteria get in there and they're starting to eat food bits that are getting down in here, when they eat, they give off gases and fluids. And they're going to put pressure on this trigeminal nerve. That's what the pain is. And it's got nowhere to go because it's all bone. And if you take antibiotics, sure, it's going to decrease the amount of bacteria in there and it's going to decrease your pain, but it didn't get rid of the bacteria. You got to get the tooth yanked or something done to it, root canal. The problem is, I had a friend who did this. He was my boss. He was a smart guy and he had money. He was just afraid of the dentist. And he had a tooth infection. It went on for a year. And because we worked at the racetrack, veterinarians would give us antibiotics, and he just took antibiotics and over and over and over again. Well, eventually you're going to get a resistant infection. And the problem is, think of where your mouth is and think of where your brain is. That infection can travel not only to the brain, it can travel to the heart and create pericarditis, which is deadly. So don't ignore a pain, tooth pain. Don't ignore an infection. There are, and if you can't afford it, there's dental clinics. Just go online, look for dental clinics. You can get work done reasonably cheap. So just for the sake of turning a mole into a mountain, you know, a molehill into a mountain, one tooth infection is not a big deal. But to let it go to the point where it can cost you your life or cause serious infection, now that's going to get expensive. So take care of your teeth. Flossing, brushing, with the sugars in our foods, dental caries are through the roof. Please, please, please take care of your teeth. Brushing and flossing twice a day with some of the sugar content that we eat. So here is a diagram of many more enzymes, which I'm not asking you to know. I'm just hoping you'll look at this diagram for a minute and look at some of the patterns that are formed. Notice most of the You've got a lot of pancreatic enzymes. You can see amylase on there. I'm asking you to know amylase. I'm asking you to know pepsin for the protein, and I just put the other ones together as protease. So for protein, pepsin in the stomach, and the rest of them just protease. It just seems they're actually under a whole umbrella. And then don't worry about nucleic acids. And then you have fats. You have lipase is the enzyme, but don't forget bile from the liver, because it emulsifies the fat so that lipase can work. And this is definitely chapter 2 coming back, from the macromolecules, from their polymers to their monomers. And then eventually, once you digest it all, you want it to go in your bloodstream, and you want the monomers to anabolize back into polymers to become you. And enzymes need optimal pH and temperature levels to function correctly. And obviously, with the stomach enzyme, we talked about pH of 1 for pepsin. Pepsin can't operate outside of that, and protease could never operate in pH of 1. So they have their own niches of pH levels. And here is a review. Hopefully you can see these right up front. You might want to pause it and try to work through it. You can see the amylase and the protease and the lipase, so you can pretty much take away right away which one is which macromolecule. Also note where they're going. The carbohydrate goes into the blood once it's glucose. The protein goes into the blood once it's an amino acid. And the fat, once it's emulsified and then broken down into short chain fatty acids, go into the lymph. Some can go into the blood, but only the short chain fatty acids. Most of your fat goes in the lymph, and that's what I'm asking you to remember here. Calories per gram, hopefully you know this. That was the whole hit behind the fat-free diet, which you shouldn't do. But 9 calories per gram for fat. It has twice the energy. That's why one reason why grease fires are so bad. That, and they're non-polar, so you can't put them out with water. Protein is 4 calories per gram, and carbohydrates 4 calories per gram. And a healthy omega-3s, I mentioned avocado oil, but you need those because you need good, healthy fatty acids to make cholesterol in your liver, and then the cholesterol will become sex hormones. So if that's not a reason to convince you should have healthy fat in your diet, I don't have anything else. So name the metabolic processes. So again, protein synthesis, cellular respiration, cell production. That's why you eat. And knowing that this is all connecting right now. So you're going from macromolecules, catabolic, chapter 3, diffusion, and then going to all the cells for all the cell processes such as cellular respiration, protein synthesis, and cell production. And here's an image. So you have albumin, which is, say, egg white. It's one of the most abundant proteins in your body and used for a lot of things, including actually water fluid balance, where water will go. So you have egg white in hydrochloric acid only, and nothing really happens. You have egg white in pepsin. It's still there. But if you have the pepsin and the pH, the acid, it dissolves down into amino acids. So that's what I'm talking about with the whole Rolaids and the GERD, the gastroesophageal reflux disease at the start of that, this system. And the liver. So here is a close-up of the liver and the pancreas dumping their goods into the small intestine for digestion. So the small intestine does not digest, it absorbs nutrients. Pancreas makes 95% of its job is to make digestive enzymes, exocrine. And the liver will make bile out of recycled red blood cells and emulsify fats in the small intestine. The liver also detoxifies, as you know. Both fructose and alcohol are treated the same way in the liver, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is serious. And it's very similar to how alcohol makes the liver fatty. And then the other one is if you decide to go on a really strict diet and you're not eating any carbohydrates, your liver is going to have to go through gluconeogenesis to make new glucose. Genesis make new glucose. And that is the ability to feed the mitochondria the glucose it needs to make ATP. Now, normally if you did it, like say you went on a fast, at 24 hours, you're going to feel a little wonky. I would drink black coffee or black tea to stimulate with caffeine because when you shift over to ketones, which are fats, you got this kind of stumbling area, and especially if you've never done it before. And caffeine will help you through it, but the liver has to be kind of jump started to stop saying, oh, carbohydrates aren't available. Now we're going to burn fatty acids and turn them into ketones. That's what the ketosis diet is. But fasting is a great way to jumpstart eating healthy because it's making all your cells start to clean house. But there's some neat videos here, but these are the only 3 roles of the liver that I'm asking you to know. There's got to be over 20. Liver makes cholesterol, which makes sex hormones. That's another important one, but these are the only 3 that I'm asking you to get.